Greetings to all listeners. I'm Mark Ganareal, the reporter from Group 4. So, in this topic, in the subject DC2130, or the cross cultural communication, we will be discussing about cross cultural adaptation. So, without further ado, let's start. So, first, in our introduction, what are we going or what to expect in this report? So we will be introducing the proponent, Dr. Young Yoon Kim, and then discuss what is cross-cultural adaptation and the method or the stress adaptation growth dynamic. So before I start with the report, I would like to start this with a quote from Melody Hobson in her talk in TED 2014. She said, "Invite people into life who don't look or act like you. You might find they challenge your assumptions and make you grow." So, how is this quote can be related to cross cultural adaptation? You know, this quote is about how we struggle to deal with other people, with other cultures, and it helps us, these stresses, these challenges, to improve our understanding, to deepen our knowledge to other people. And it helps us grow, not just personally, but socially to other people. So, what is the social aspect here at cross cultural adaptation? There were three main social aspects. So, first is culture. What is culture? It is a system of knowledge, beliefs, values, customs, behaviors, even artifacts that are collected, shared, and used by its members in their everyday lives. To simply put, culture is about what you do every day, your lifestyle, and what you have inherited from the past generation or the past cultures. So it is a passing down of everyday routine, of everyday practices. And then the second one to be discussed in cross cultural adaptation is the cross cultural adaptation itself. So, what is cross cultural adaptation compared to just the term culture? Cross cultural adaptation means the process of dynamic unfolding of the natural human tendency to struggle for an internal equilibrium in the face of often adversarial environment condition. So, to simply put, cross cultural adaptation is about people trying to mingle, trying to, from the term adaptation, adapt or to a culture what he had experienced or what he is seeing, what he is feeling, sensing around him or around her. And then last that will be discussed is the stress adaptation growth. What is stress adaptation growth dynamic? So it is the continual dialectal process of push and pull or identity engagement and disengagement. So, in comparison to cross cultural adaptation, stress adaptation growth dynamic is about how you perform with the community. It is about how you adapt or how you reject a certain culture or a certain practice into your life. Okay, now we have discussed the main points of cross cultural adaptation. We will introduce to you who is the proponent of this concept. So we have here Yang Yoon Kim. So Yang Yoon Kim is a doctor of communication in Northwestern University and Evanston, Illinois in 1976. So she earned her degree at Northwestern University, Evanston, Illinois in the year 1976. So, where did she develop communication communication studies. So she developed it at the University of Oklahoma. She taught intercultural communication, cross cultural communication, inter-ethnic communication, and international communication. And there are other communication studies, but not involved, not put in this presentation. So, and there in her works, we have here the becoming intercultural and integrative theory of communication and cross-cultural adaptation. So in this book, this is where we base our report. This is where the cross-cultural adaptation, the dynamic method are being driven or being sourced out. Okay, now let us talk about cross-cultural adaptation. In cross-cultural adaptation, there are three levels of adaptation. So most of us know what are these levels of adaptation. First of all is the assimilation. Assimilation is about the co-cultural members who are waving to the dominant culture by assuming its modes of behavior. So it means that you have adopted fully what was being offered to you by your environment, by the community, or by the culture around you. So accommodation is the members still resort to their cultural identity while thriving to establish a relationship with members of the dominant culture. So in comparison to assimilation, accommodation is like going to a hotel, right? When you go to a hotel, that area or that room is not yours, okay? But you are trying to feel comfortable while knowing your limitations. So in comparison to assimilation, you are aware of the environment that it is being offered to you, but you're also conscious about your personal safety, your personal identity. And the most different or the least accepting adaptation process or the cross cultural adaptation is the separation. Okay, the separation is about the co-cultural members are inclined to resist with members of the dominant culture. So, in this level, it is the lowest level of adaptation because you totally reject what is being offered, what is around you, what are the cultures surrounding you. And this resulted to culture shock. So, what is culture shock? Common phenomenon, and though it may take months to develop, it often affects travelers and people living far from home in unexpected ways. So, cross cultural adaptation had been developed because of these tendencies of people experiencing culture shock. And culture shock is the adverse effect or maybe the cause of why you are experiencing separation. So, in this concept developed by Young Yun Kim, she had made a stress adaptation growth dynamic. So, what is stress adaptation growth dynamic? It is the continual dialectical process of push and pull or identity engagement and disengagement. So, it is made in order for us to identify how can we cope up with other culture? How can we step up from separation to accommodation to assimilation of other cultures and at the same time reduce the number or the experiences of culture shock. So stress adaptation growth dynamic is the greater or the explanation for this is the greater the challenges one encounters in inter-ethnic communication experiences, the more profound the opportunity for new learnings such experiences would present. This seemingly paradoxical principle suggests the unity in which stress and adaptation are inseparable. Adaptation occurs because of the stress and cannot occur without the stress. So, Adaptation, you cannot say that you have adopted something if you haven't experienced the stress from adopting it, because because the simplest understanding, or the simplest way to know that you have adopted something away from your everyday life or everyday culture is when you experience stress, and then that stress develops your um, growth over time, and that growth over time makes you um, acceptable, or makes you assimilate with that culture. So, what are the factors affecting this growth dynamic? So, we have five factors. So, the communication factor, environmental factors, individual predispositions, intercultural transformation, and the linking the dimensions and factors. So first is the communication factors. So it is about um, the overall internal capacity of a stranger to decode and encode information in accordance with the host cultural communication practices, such as the cognitive, the affective, and the operational factors. So simply put, it is about the communication process. Next is the environmental factors. So the adaptive function of the individual's host communication competence and social engagement through interpersonal and mass communication activities cannot be fully explained in isolation from the conditions of the host environment. So in comparison to communication factors, which is intrapersonal, environmental factors are interpersonal, which we also include the environment. So there will be some barriers, or there will be noise, or about the channels that you have used, or about the community around you that may affect your communication, the tendency that you may disengage or engage to cultural adaptation. And then the third factor, which may affect the stress adaptation growth dynamic, is about the individual predisposition. So it is about the differing levels of preparedness or readiness to learn and adapt to the life in that environment, including the extent of cultural learning is being discussed. So it is about your position about the culture. Okay, it is about you. It is about your point. It is about your position about that culture. Let's say, for example, you were a Filipino, and suddenly you go to abroad to work in a country near in the country in Eastern Asia. So it is Japan, China, Korea, and the like. So in that country, time is money. Okay, so in this, you have to analyze your individual predisposition. Aside from the environmental factors, you also have to stress yourself about your individual practices or your positions. So it is a big, big factor. Third is the intercultural transformation. So it is about the process of cross cultural adaptation unfolds. Okay, so likewise, in the individual predisposition, intercultural transformation is about you having to transform your understanding or to change your perspective, and then try to unfold what was being offered to you. And the last is the linking the dimensions and factors. So we have to interconnect these factors and many more factors in order for us to understand how our stresses in adaptation may result to growth over time. So, how can we relate this cross-cultural adaptation to development communication field or the DevCom field. First of all, it shares awareness and information, and it enhances and empowers DevCom. Through this theory, we can perform better in information dissemination by being culture and race sensitive. So, the problem with the present situation is that we were so what do you call this centered, self-centered, by having our mindset being focused to Manila centric or the metropolitan centric. So we have disregarded other cultures or the other practices because we believe that those practices were so ethnic or so ancient or or outdated that it may not contribute to the so-called development in our mindset. But in fact, this culture is essential in learning our backgrounds and in learning how we should see the future. So this cross-cultural adaptation also helps DevCom to see better the in-depth nature or the basic assumptions of people. Knowing the very basic reasons of a culture can help them address their needs on a grassroots level of development. So in DevCom, we always look the grassroots level approach. We always try to see what are the struggles of the people, of the mass. Okay, not the elites or the oligarchs, but the mass, the poor sectors, the marginalized sectors, those who are struggling to provide their basic needs, those who have the least means of necessities. And last, this cross-cultural adaptation helps DevCom to transcend profession to see the global trends and international goals. Looking our society in a larger scope helps us see other possibilities in the present situation. Okay, so this is another another role of DevCom, which is the international communication or the international relations field. Because in DevCom, we do not just use the grassroots approach, but we have here that to think globally but act locally. So the help of knowing how to cope up with the stress and adapting to certain culture helps DevCom to cope up with the present situation and try to find a path or try to find alternative solution to the problem while considering the present culture. So it is a combination of development and assimilation. Very, very DevCom. So with that, I would like to thank you for listening. So again, we are Group 4 and I'm Mark Christian. Thank you.